Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Q. In this video, I will fully review the Tier 7 Premium Italian Heavy Fighter, the Savoia-Marchetti SM.91. Hello there. It's been a while since I last posted a video. Real life has become busy and it's harder to find time to squeeze in gaming related activities currently. Nonetheless, a new plane being added to the game is important, so I've made time to bring you this review. And that's the SM.91 on the tarmac outside my hangar. Not only that, but there's cake, because this week sees the 11th birthday of World of Warplanes. As I release this video, we have the return of the alternative game modes, Attrition and Bomber Escort, during which you'll be able to earn reward crates and, with luck, an operation order for this plane, the SM.91, will drop from one quickly for you. No doubt that operation order, when you activate it, will send you on a chain of combat missions, and the reward for completing the chain will be this plane. Good luck with that. Before I talk about the plane, I need to issue a small warning. I am making this video a couple of days before the event for it starts, and it's possible the World of Warplanes team will make some late-breaking changes to the plane's attributes. I think it's unlikely, and even if they do, they ought to be relatively minor, so I think you'll find this video is accurate enough, come what may. So, this is the second Italian badged plane in the game, and the first Italian heavy fighter. It's a Tier 7 plane, so it's often going to face some powerful competition from Tier 8 planes, and of course the Bf-109K6, nominally a Tier 7 plane, but more like a Tier 7.5. In the game, the plane has reasonably heavy armament along with a defensive rear gun, but the attributes of the plane, at least those that are in the public domain, aren't impressive. However, as you'll see, those underwhelming statistics are offset by the equipment slots. More on that later in the video. In real life, the SM.91 was a 1942 prototype designed to compete for a contract offered by the Regia Aeronautica, the Italian Air Force, equipped with German engines and featuring even more armament than it has in the game. Perhaps because it was still undergoing development, it wasn't entered into official tests, and in 1943 the first prototype was captured and sent to Germany. It vanished there. Presumably it was destroyed. An incomplete second prototype was also captured by the Germans and was tested in July 1944, but was destroyed by bombing later that year. Let's take a look at the numbers for the aircraft. Here's a spreadsheet showing all of the Tier 7 heavy fighters, with the numbers for the SM.91 appearing in columns C and D, and those for the other planes in columns off to the right. If you don't know how this spreadsheet works, there's a link to a video that explains it in the description below. I'll mention again that these numbers may change slightly. The World of Warplanes team was thinking about changing the speed of the aircraft a little and making the bombs a little more potent. However, I think it's likely that won't happen, and even if it does, it's not likely to make a significant difference to the plane for the majority of players. For the purposes of this comparison, the planes have been put into their stock configuration, with ordnance, if there is any, mounted. For instance, the VB-10 doesn't have any ordnance. The equipment has been removed and the pilot sent back to the barracks. The modules are all the top ones. As you know, once you specialise the aircraft and put a well-trained pilot into it, you'll be able to improve on these numbers considerably. The offensive weaponry of the SM.91 comprises 5 20mm cannons mounted in the nose, and they have a damage output of 550. If you look to the right, you may form the impression that this is decidedly average, with several planes boasting superior numbers. However, hold that thought. When I look at the equipment slots later in the video, you'll see the numbers are only a part of the story, besides which some of these numbers are actually rather good. The guns have a rate of fire of 400, and bearing in mind that these are not long-range sniper cannons, an excellent range of 2,559 feet. The auto angle, the amount by which you can be off target and the game corrects your aim for you, is a little tight at just 2 degrees. though it's no worse than many of the cannons on the planes in this comparison. On the other hand, the dispersion angle at 0.4 degrees, and that's the way the shells spread out as they leave the muzzle of your gun, is excellent. And that will give you some opportunities when it comes to pilot skills, which I'll talk about later. And the time to overheat is 8 seconds, which is generous, and the shell velocity is high at 1,457 feet per second. Overall, these guns handle nicely. There is some defensive armament, a 20mm cannon with a damage output of 128 and a range of 2,297 feet, but be warned. It's severely limited by what is one of the worst windows in which you can use a rear gun. For example, you won't be able to use the familiar technique of pitching your aircraft up to shoot at opponents, and anything more than slight yawing from side to side will also take the gun out of its firing arc. The SM.91 carries what I take to be 4 100kg bombs, which have to be dropped with a little care as the damage radius is small. The cumulative damage is 8,400, which is typical for the heavies in this comparison carrying a relatively light payload, but the resupply time is a long 3 minutes. Most of us, and I include myself in this, will not be aiming to get Gabreski medals in this plane. However, the ability to destroy a couple of gun emplacements, which is what I use the bombs for most often, can usefully speed up the capture of a sector. These survivability figures, while similar to those of a number of planes in this comparison, are not impressive. 400 hit points is only a little above that of the most robust Tier 7 light fighter, and the damage resistance of 48 is entirely average for heavy fighters. However, the fire resistance is best in class at 65, though most of the heavies here have a value of 60 or 65 for this attribute, the exception being the Key 94-1, which is prone to catching fire. The airspeed figures are a mixed bag, but mostly on the ordinary side or worse. The cruise speed of 329 miles an hour is second worst in class, and quite some way worse than several of the planes in this comparison. However, the maximum speed under boost is 435 miles an hour, which is close to being third best in class. Boost duration is in the middle of the class at 30 seconds, but the dive speed is second worst in class again, being better only than that of the TU-1. We've got no measures in the public domain for acceleration, but my impression was that the plane accelerates reasonably well without being outstanding. And again, equipment slots have a bearing here, so don't rush to judgment immediately. Let me drop down for a moment so I can show you that there's a lot of red amongst the figures for manoeuvrability. Actually, there's quite a lot of red on the plane full stop. Rather than go through the figures one by one, I suggest you pause here and look at the comparisons with the other aircraft. Probably you'll conclude that the rating of 33, which is third worst in class, seems to reflect that these figures aren't that great, though at least the speed range in which the SM.91 retains full manoeuvrability is quite good, unlike several of the other planes here. I'm going to mention equipment slots again, but this time I'll also say that it would be quite tricky to use them to improve both speed and manoeuvrability. The altitude performance is actually not bad, without being exceptional. It will give you a little bit of an advantage over some of the other heavies, and only the Zwilling has a noticeably superior altitude performance. Finally, I mentioned that I didn't think that the acceleration of the SM.91 was bad, though it wasn't good either, but the power to weight ratios would suggest that it could be below average in this regard. These figures are third worst in class. Of course, we don't know anything about drag in the game, and the SM.91 at least looks as if it is a sleek aircraft, so perhaps these are misleading. One thing to note is that removing the bombs won't improve your speed. So, where do I think these figures position the aircraft in the game? Well, I'm not ready to give you an opinion about that. I need to show you the equipment slots first, and I'll keep my opinion for the last section of the video. Remember, there are many statistics for aircraft in this game that we do not know. what I call hidden statistics, and what others call soft stats. What I can say is that, in some circumstances, despite the publicly available figures being rather average for the most part, the SM91 can be quite powerful, that is, better than these numbers would suggest. Let me show you the equipment slots for the plane. Here we are. I've mentioned them several times, and now you can see the equipment slots. When you have the SM91 specialised, you will have 5, yes that's 5, equipment slots available to you. All the other heavies at Tier 7 have 4 equipment slots. The equipment slots are spread across all sections of the plane with the exception of the ordnance, which isn't a drawback, and there's an equipment slot for the airframe, which is unique amongst the heavies and which brings into play equipment you can't use on them, such as the lightweight wing frame or the polished skin, as I have here. There are 2 slots on the offensive weaponry, an arrangement shared only with the Key 94-1, which means you can do a lot to increase the potency of the guns. In short, you have the flexibility with these equipment slots to do much to offset what were quite ordinary numbers you saw in the previous section. This being a future premium aircraft, even when the SM91 is stock, it's not too bad. One of the equipment slots on the offensive weaponry is locked, but you'll still be able to improve the guns with the remaining slot. There is a total of 4 consumable slots, and I guess that's payback for having 5 equipment slots, because that's 1 less than all the other heavies. And when the SM91 is stock, the slot for the ordnance is locked, but that hinders you only on what is essentially a secondary characteristic of the plane. Most of you will not be concentrating on bombing with this plane. It is worth noting that there is no consumable slot for the airframe, unlike every other heavy at Tier 7. More payback, I suppose. And that said, I'd rather have 5 equipment slots and 4 consumable slots than the other way around. Let's see what equipment I've chosen for the plane. All of the equipment you see here is ultimate level and fully calibrated. I have deliberately not mounted any experimental or special project equipment, but if you have it, you can further improve the attributes of the plane. Experimental equipment in the offensive weaponry slots would be, for instance, a powerful choice. Also, bear in mind I haven't finally settled on my choices for the airframe and the engine slots. Before I talk about those, let me deal with the cockpit slot. There are 2 choices of equipment, cockpit armour and gunsight. I favour the gunsight for 2 reasons. First, my approach to flying planes is to use speed and agility to avoid being shot, so it's unusual for me to pick equipment in any of the slots that reinforces or protects the pilot or aircraft on any plane from the fighter classes. Secondly, in training a pilot for the SM91, I'd aim to exploit the inherent accuracy of the guns, remember that dispersion angle, and not use Marksman 1 and Marksman 2 as early skills. I still want to improve the accuracy though, so I choose the gunsight here. My choice of bonus characteristics further improve the accuracy of the guns and increase the chance of causing fires. The other choices, where you can improve the pilot's resistance to injuries or increase the chance of causing critical damage, are good ones too. Taking the airframe and engine slots together for a moment, previously in this video I said that it could be a little tricky to use those equipment slots both to improve the speed of the plane and its manoeuvrability. Nonetheless, in those slots that's what I've thought about doing, so I have a polished skin and a lightweight power unit. With the polished skin, I aim to improve the rather poor cruise speed of the plane, and the lightweight power unit improves manoeuvrability. In the post-build effects section, I'll show you the effects of a lightweight wing frame combined with an uprated engine, and some other builds. But even if you concentrate only on speed and agility, ignoring, like me, possibilities for reinforcing the plane, you have 6 different combinations of equipment for these 2 slots. I advise you to experiment. I will be. Also, if you like to use reinforcing equipment, don't let me dissuade you. It's my preference not to do that. Obviously, it's not a rule. These are your choices for equipment in the airframe slot, and I've chosen the polished skin. That has positive effects on cruise speed, maximum speed under boost, and dive acceleration, whilst adversely affecting manoeuvrability in turns and yawing. Part of the positive effects comes from my choice of bonus characteristics. The others that are available improve the dive acceleration and yaw. Now, I'm not interested in improving dive acceleration, but I might replace the improvement in maximum speed under boost, one of my current characteristics, as you can see in orange down there, with an improved yaw. The choices for the engine slot are here, and I've made you aware that I'll be experimenting with the uprated engine and the combined injection boost system. But for now, I am using a lightweight power unit to improve yaw, turning and cruise speed, with an adverse effect on the engine's resistance to critical damage. You can see from the bonus characteristics how much of the improvements come from them. Note that I've ameliorated the negative effect on the engine's resistance to critical damage with one of them. The other bonus characteristics improve acceleration and also provide a little more cruise speed, but I'm happy with my choices here. When it comes to the offensive weaponry, or the forward-firing weapon slots as the World of Warplanes team chooses to call this aspect of the plane, I have no doubts as to what to choose. My aims are to lift the damage output of the guns and to allow them to fire for longer without overheating, and to do that I use reinforced bolt carriers and gas-operated action. If you have experimental versions of those, consider using them here if you haven't allocated them to the key 94-1. Aside from better improvements, the bonus characteristics are better for lifting damage output. On the reinforced bolt carriers, I have a nearly 30% improvement in the burst length and an improvement in the rate of fire. That's more damage practically, with an adverse effect on accuracy. You can see from my choice of bonus characteristics that they were dedicated to helping with the improvements to burst length and rate of fire, but you can, if you wish, improve the cooling of the weapons and improve the accuracy a little. Those aren't bad choices. The gas-operated action is giving an 18% improvement in the rate of fire and an improvement in the cooling of the weapons. Again, there's a loss of accuracy as an adverse effect. My bonus characteristics are helping with the rate of fire and the cooling of the guns, whilst offsetting the loss of accuracy. If you prefer, you can increase the chances of causing fires and further improving the cooldown time. If you have ultimate level, fully calibrated experimental bolt carriers and gas-operated action, if you optimize them for damage, you can lift this figure of 682 to 757. I know some of you are going to do that. As you can see, the server has just gone down in order to apply update 2.1.30, but I'm going to do the consumables whilst I still have them on the screen. And there are no surprises here. I use a first aid dressing package as there are 2 crew members. And there is no slot, unusually as I've mentioned already, on the airframe, and I use engine cooling in the engine slot. Alternatively, you might use the improved mixture control for better thrust and cruise speed. And with engine cooling, I usually say that it gives you 10 seconds of extra boost, and if you apply it whilst you're boosting, that's roughly the practical effect. However, lately I've been applying it when I'm not boosting, which means you can restore something like 12 or 13 seconds of boost quite quickly. Bear that in mind, though, if I'm trying to chase down a bomber way above me in an XF-90 and the XF-90 doesn't have full boost available, I'm still going to use my engine cooling consumable to help the pursuit. I use universal ammunition in the guns and improved fragmentation for the bombs. There are gold munitions available, but if you use those, probably you already know what they do. For what it's worth, I think those should be removed from the game, and I use them only in limited circumstances and not for this plane. You can, if you wish though. Although it's neither equipment nor consumables, one more thing you can change to affect your plane's configuration is the paint job or decoration set. Some of you call it camouflage, I tend to call it my livery. The SM91 has a special livery, and I'll show you the bonuses it confers. So if we hover over the camouflage for the airframe, it gives you an extra 5% aircraft experience, which will help you get to specialised status more quickly. That doesn't compare particularly well with the summer paint scheme, and I'm on the summer season here. This paint scheme will only apply on summer maps, where you have 3 bonus characteristics, or even the universal paint scheme, which can be used on all 4 seasons, and these 2 bonus characteristics will still apply. But if you want to grind towards specialisation as quickly as possible, then this is the one to choose. Now remember, when you've got specialisation, come to crew, make sure you tick accelerate crew training, and then that 5% aircraft experience will convert to 5% crew experience. And talking of which, the nose art gives you the standard 5% crew experience bonus, and the emblems give you the standard 2% crew experience bonus. The SM91 is a premium aircraft, so you can train pilots in it from other planes without suffering a penalty. The question is it like other European and international planes that can be assigned to other nations? I've shifted to the left for a moment so I can show you by right-clicking on the aircraft in the carousel, and yes, for 100,000 credits, you can assign the aircraft to any of the 5 major nations in the game, and of course, back to Italy if you wish. And that means you can use this as a crew trainer for almost all your pilots and gunners. Some of you may prefer to do that, especially as it may mean you can start with a good crew immediately in the plane rather than a relatively untrained Italian one, but I chose to remain with an Italian crew. The SM91 has 2 crew members, and for once I'll start with the gunner, whose skill panel I have open here. If you choose to keep the aircraft Italian, then initially you will have a completely untrained gunner. The only other Italian badged plane in the game is the RE 2005, a light fighter without defensive armament and therefore no gunner crew. That isn't as much of a problem as you might think, because, as I mentioned before, the rear gun on the SM91 has such limited firing arcs, both up and down and from left to right, that you won't be making much use of it manually, and it won't do a great deal automatically. For what it's worth, I'd follow my usual path here, starting with defensive fire, following with precision gunner, working through quick reflexes and the 2 1-point skills before amassing enough points to drop them and apply armourer and ballistics expert, before working my way back to quick reflexes. It will be a long time before your Italian gunner has that many skills. Given I've opted to stay with an Italian crew, you won't be surprised that I put the pilot from the RE 2005 in the SM91, but I did reset his skills slightly. He'll still be good in both planes, and I have his skill panel on the screen here. I've opted to have both the manoeuvrability skills, aerodynamics expert and aerobatics expert, in that order, assuming you have equipment on the plane. Aerodynamic expert increases the effect of equipment that improves agility and also speed. If you can't afford that equipment initially, choose aerobatics expert unless you want to concentrate on acceleration and speed, in which case you'll head for both engine guru skills. Only the second of these increases speed, by the way. The first only increases acceleration and thrust. From there, I'd head towards resilience, because when you're down to 30% of your health, you get a significant boost to your plane's capabilities. You can see this on the screen here. I've not made enough use of this skill in the past, tending to go the traditional way of improving the engine and the accuracy of the guns with this block of 4 skills here. But I'm moving away from that in many cases, and that's an illustration of how one's thinking about the game evolves over time. After resetting the skills to get resilience, I chose Engine Guru 1 next, and that's perhaps part of the reason why I don't notice a problem with the acceleration on the plane. And after that, I have a choice between Engine Guru 2 and Adrenaline Rush. This latter skill is brilliant on fast aircraft with good offensive weaponry, but I suspect the SM-91 may be just a little slow for it to be really useful, as it's only effective for 10 seconds after killing an aircraft, and the plane may struggle to reach another target in that time, unless you're in a furball. That's a lot of planes in a dogfight, in which case you're likely to be in a bit of trouble with this plane. If I want both Engine Guru 2 and Adrenaline Rush, then if I've done the maths correctly, I'd have to drop one of the skills I have currently, and that would likely be Aerobatics Expert. If you want to preserve agility by keeping Aerobatics Expert, then you might, and this would be in the dim and distant future, opt for Battle Tested or Cruise Flight. I would probably go for Cruise Flight. Remember, if you're using an Italian pilot, that you would also put in the RE 2005, keep half an eye on what would suit that plane too. Personally, I'd be inclined to set the pilot up primarily for the SM-91. You'll notice I haven't mentioned either of the two marksman skills. I'm relying on the inherent accuracy of the guns so that I don't use skill points on these skills. This part of the video was recorded after the introduction of patch 2.1.30, and, it turns out, the World of Warplanes team has made changes to the base attributes of the aircraft. It's rare that you, the viewer, will see such changes, but I'm going to run through them now. The resupply time for the bombs has halved from 3 minutes to 1.5 minutes, which ostensibly looks like an excellent change because you will have the option to bomb, for instance, a couple of gun emplacements at almost every sector you visit, which probably wouldn't have been the case with the longer reload. However, that comes with a penalty. You'll see that the cruise speed and the maximum speed under boost have both been reduced, in the former case to 322 miles an hour, which is now the worst cruise speed of any Tier 7 heavy, and in the latter case 425 miles an hour, which is nearer to the XP-75 Eagle and the VB-10 instead of the swifter Zwilling. There is a trick you can use here though. Originally, demounting the bombs had no effect on the airspeeds, but now it does, and if you remove them you will return to the original speeds of 329 miles an hour and 435 miles an hour. I'd be inclined to do that, since I think the ground attack capability of the plane, even with that halved resupply time on the bombs, is a marginal benefit. If you disagree, these changes might incline you to do more with your equipment, consumables and pilot skills on the speeds of the plane and less on agility. The climb rate has been slightly affected too, down to 420 feet per second, but again, you can get it back to the original 426 feet per second by demounting the bombs. Now I'm going to look at the effect my choices of equipment, consumables, pilot skills and so on have had on the base figures of the aircraft, and those can be seen in C and D. These are the new figures, not the ones I showed you earlier in the video. And as a reminder, all the equipment is ultimate level and fully calibrated. We have a gun side, polished skin, lightweight power unit, reinforced bulk carriers, and gas-operated action. On the guns, let's just see if we can get that to say forward armament. There we go. We've got an improvement in the rating to 42, 20% improvement. That's mostly come from this damage output improvement from 550 to 680, 23.6% improvement. Actually, the UI says it's 682, it's just a rounding error. That's come from an improvement in the rate of fire of the guns, which again has gone up by 23.6% to 494, and a rate of fire improvement is also a damage output improvement, so that's also gone up by 23.6% to 136 per gun. No change to the range. Auto aim angle, we've improved it by 5%, the most you can do, to 2.1. That's the amount you can be off target by and you'll still hit your target as far as the game's concerned. It's still pretty tight, but it's better than the original 2. Theoretically, I've brought the dispersion angle, the way that the shells leave the muzzle, how tightly they leave the muzzle of the gun, down to 0.38 by my calculations. The UI actually says it's worsened by 0.08, but frankly, it's not much of a change either way. What is a fairly significant change is an improvement in the burst length to 10.4 seconds. That's a 30% improvement, and that's going to make quite a difference to the amount of damage you can do to aircraft. You can't change the shell velocity, so that's unchanged, and there are no changes to the defensive armament either, which remains at 128 DPS and a range of 2,297 feet. Some other improvements: we have a 10% extra chance of causing a fire, and the guns cool down 10% quicker. On ordnance, I mounted a consumable to improve the damage output, so we get a 10% improvement to 9,240. If you take the bombs off, you won't get that, of course, and I'm likely to take the bombs off, I think, but if you're keeping the bombs, then that will be welcome. Survivability, we've lost a point of damage resistance, otherwise there are no change, and that's related to these changes here. The engines are more likely to take critical damage by 12%, the pilot is more likely to be injured by 17%. Big changes on airspeed. The rating's gone up to 65. We've managed to improve the cruise speed, which is poor, by 56 miles an hour to a useful 378 miles an hour. That's a 17.5% improvement. We've managed to tweak the maximum speed under boost a little to 431 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour improvement. No change to the boost duration and no change to the dive speed. Some other effects down here: got better acceleration in the dive by 10%. Okay, it's better than nothing. We've also got 3% acceleration improvements both under boost and without boost. Now, if you take the bombs off, those figures for cruise speed will become 386 miles an hour and maximum boost speed will become 441 miles an hour. Quite attractive changes in my opinion. Interestingly, there's no change in the climb rate, which may be a small bug in the specialized configuration, but it's not going to matter. On manoeuvrability, the rating's gone up to 37. We've managed to improve the turn time by average turn time, I should say. Not all turns are equal, of course. Depends on the circumstances in which you find yourself. By something like 3/4 of a second, which is a handsome improvement. The roll rate, an improvement of 1 degree per second. I don't think you're going to notice that. There is a 15% improvement in the yaw manoeuvrability, and this manoeuvrability is enough to fight bot heavies quite successfully. Still be wary about attacking human heavy fighters with this kind of manoeuvrability. You're more likely to have to use slash and burn techniques against those. Finally, on the altitude performance, there's an improvement in the climb rate from 420 to 432 feet per second. Just as a reminder, the pilot has aerobatics expert, aerodynamics expert, engine guru 1 and resilience as skills. The gunner only has defensive fire. Another way to try and improve cruise speed and manoeuvrability is to go with an uprated engine and a lightweight wing frame in place of the polished skin and the lightweight power unit. Now, I'm going to say straight away, I don't think this is a good approach for heavies. This is the kind of thing you might do on a light fighter if you're really intent on improving manoeuvrability as opposed to speed. Now, we can immediately skip over the guns and the ordnance. There will be no changes from the previous build, but we can see on the survivability there are some changes. We've lost a rating point down to 9. We've lost 26 hit points, that's 6.6 of our hit point pool. We've still lost 1 point of damage resistance, and we've also now got a decreased resistance to fire of 23%. And I think that's a bit risky on this heavy. It's a bit fragile anyway. On the airspeed, the improvement is 61, which is still better than the original figures, but it's not as good a rating as the previous build. You can see straight away that the improvement in the cruise speed is only 34 miles an hour. It's gone up to 356, and we've got no improvement on the maximum speed under boost this time. No effects on the boost duration and maximum dive speed either. The manoeuvrability is better, so the rating is 39 as opposed to 37 previously, and that's because we've managed to improve the turn time by 1.15 seconds, and we've got actually that is fairly significant, 18 degrees per second improvement in the roll rate. However, to offset that, you can see that the manoeuvrability on the yaw has gone down to 3.4%. Also with airspeed, we've still got 3% acceleration with boost, and we've now got 17% acceleration without boost, so that's good. On the survivability, the wings are more likely to take damage, which isn't great for that heavy again, and the pilot's still going to take as much, is going to take injury as frequently as previously as well. And the altitude performance, the climb rate has come down to 422, very slight improvement on the original figures, and 10 feet per second worse than the previous build. Same pilot and gunner. Demounting the bombs for this configuration brings the cruise speed to 363 miles an hour and the maximum boost speed to 435. Funnily enough, the climb rate does go up to 428, which is a bit odd considering it didn't change in the previous configuration. Not sure why that's happening. But the long and short of it is, this is not the approach to improving the cruise speed and maneuverability that I would choose. I much prefer the first build that I showed you. For the final build I'm going to show you, I've got a balanced speed build, and this is using a polished skin and a combined injection boost system. And we can skip straight over the guns and the ordnance again. The survivability figures, these figures here are back to their base values, however we've still got that increased likelihood of injury to the pilot by 17%. The airspeed, the rating is 65 like the first build, but it's achieved differently. There's a 51 mile an hour improvement on the cruise speed, taking that to 373 miles an hour, and a 41 mile an hour improvement on the boost speed, maximum boost speed, taking that to 466 miles an hour. And the penalty is that we lose 4.5 seconds of boost here. Some improvements also here, 17% acceleration with boost improvement, an improvement by 3% of the acceleration without boost, an improvement in dive acceleration by 10%, and also an improvement in the engine cooldown rate of 15%. Maneuverability takes a hit. The rating is 33, which is the same in space, but you can see that the turn time is ever so slightly worse than the base figure. It's 0.11 seconds slower. We've got that 1 degree per second improvement in roll rate again, but we've also lost 1.8% of the yaw maneuverability. Nevertheless, lots of you are going to like flying the aircraft like this because it's going to feel very rapid. And we've also got an improvement in the climb rate to 460 feet per second, 40 feet per second improvement, or 9.5%. That's using the same pilot and gunner as I had previously. If you take the bombs off, then you'll get a cruise speed of 381 miles an hour and a maximum boost speed of 477 miles an hour, and the climb rate will go up to 467 feet per second. Now, of course, you can actually use an uprated engine instead of the combined injection boost system. That has an adverse effect on survivability. For instance, this fire rating will come down, fire resistance figure will come down to 50. Actually, the UI shows 48. The airspeed rating will go up to 71, and if you don't mount the bombs, you can expect the cruise speed to go up to something like 420 miles an hour, but the boost maximum speed to come down slightly to 441 miles an hour. Some of you may find that appealing. Of course, the maneuverability will still be about the same as this, and the climb rate will be significantly worse, about 430, 432 feet per second. So some of you may want to go for the uprated engine instead of the combined injection boost system, but personally I'd go for this balanced speed build rather than weighting it all on the cruise speed. And there you go. Here's what I call the performance analysis, and the performance analysis is quite simply a series of 25 battles fought in the SM-91 at various times of day and at various points in the week. So this is a morning battle, afternoon, evening, weekend morning, weekend evening, and so on and so on. I record the number of players per team. I also do something called battle or order composition analysis. To put this in simple terms, I'm looking to see if the enemy team's got an extra high-tier aircraft, or we have, or nobody has. Influence points. Generally, the way that you win is by getting to the total number of required influence points. Of course, you can also destroy the enemy combat group to get a victory, but that's less common. Record whether it's a win or a loss. Battle tier, which of course the maximum is 8, the minimum is 7. Chevrons, earned points scored, the rank in the battle, number of kills, which is a class-specific mission, aerial target damage, ground targets destroyed and ground target damage, capture points earned, another class-specific mission for a heavy, bomber and GAA kills, another class, the final class-specific mission for the for a heavy, and then the number of deaths, and finally all the medals here. Then I've got some averages, and then I break down those averages by battle tier 8 and battle tier 7, and there's some other analysis down here that we'll talk about in a moment. So I'm just going to close this up because we don't need to look at the raw data, and then we'll talk about the averages. And we can see that on average I earned 3.7 chevrons per game, reasonably good. Top was 5, unsurprisingly, that's a hero of the sky. Minimum was 1, never failed to earn a chevron. Average personal points, 13,547 with a maximum of 23.5 roughly, and a minimum of 6,355, which is probably a tier 8 game. Now, I do some extra analysis on the personal points, and that's just here. Standard deviation is not going to interest you, but what is interesting is whether or not this is a significantly higher average than the average I manage across all planes. Now, the average I manage across all planes is around about 10,544. This is statistically significant. In fact, it's very statistically significant, and that suggests that in this plane, I do better than I do on average across all planes. In other words, this plane helps me be better. Rank 1, on average 1.2, so most often first, and the worst was third, incidentally. Average of 12.8 kills per game with a maximum of 24 and a minimum of 5. Aerial target damage, average 6,375, the maximum was 13,000, just over. The worst was 3,700, more or less. Ground targets, now bear in mind this was done with the reload time on the bombs being 3 minutes. So you will do better probably if you mount the bombs with the 90-second reload, 1.5 minutes. But of course, you may take the bombs off in order to get extra speed out of the plane as well, which is what I'm strongly considering doing. So with a 3-minute reload, I was averaging 1.68 ground targets per game. The maximum was 4. I guess you can probably say that that's probably going to go something maybe 3, and this might go to 6 with half the resupply time. Ground target damage, 5,266 on average. I actually managed 14,263 in one game. That's quite spectacular. Average capture points, 410 with a maximum of 780, minimum of 180. Average 4.6 bomber and ground attacker kills per game with a maximum of 10. That's probably bots feeding themselves to me over a plant. And there was at least one game where I didn't kill any bombers or ground attackers. Average number of deaths, 1.3 per game, but you can see there was a game here where I had 5 deaths, probably a tier 8 game as well. There were some games where I didn't have any deaths at all. Now, if we split that out into Battle Tier 8 and Battle Tier 7, first off, you can see that I was in Battle Tier 7s, that is, I was top tier, only 44% of the time. And in fact, when I started this, the first 10 to 15 games, it was actually running at only 20%. So as I was learning the plane, I was actually most often in difficult battles at Tier 8. And that eventually evened out to about 44%. And the win rate for Battle Tier 7 was quite high, 73%. Having said that, against Tier 8 aircraft, not surprisingly, it was only 50%, which gave me an overall win rate of 60%. Now, that's some way below my average of 65% across all aircraft, but Tier 7 is one of those nasty tiers where you're often fighting Tier 8 planes, and of course, there are a lot of very good planes at Tier 8, so I don't think 60% win rate overall with this number of high-tier battles is too bad. Average number of chevrons you can see was slightly better at Tier 7 than it was Tier 8, and as you cast your eye across here, pretty much that pattern is repeated. Better personal points when I'm top tier, better ranking, higher number of kills. Aerial target damage is interesting, but of course you've got, with Tier 8s, higher hit point pool aircraft that you're shooting at and destroying. So in fact, the damage you can do at Tier 8, I did at Tier 8, was actually on average higher. And the number of ground targets, because I probably switched to trying to get ground targets to flip sectors, was also slightly higher, and therefore the ground target damage on average was slightly higher as well. Capture points actually almost the same, but it was slightly less for Battle Tier 8. Now, this is probably where the damage is coming from for aerial targets. I was killing more bombers and ground attackers because they're easier to kill in Tier 8 games than the fighters, the heavies, and the multi-roles. And as you would expect, I died more often on average in Battle Tier 8. And that's something you're going to have to sort of just put up with this plane. It is Tier 7. It's going to face Tier 8s a lot. And naturally, those are more powerful aircraft. You're going to do worse in the plane on average. The number of players per game averaged 8. The average margin of victory was 69. Not too surprising considering I was fighting so many Tier 8 battles. But what that means is that you're not dominating battles at Tier 8, that's for sure. And then finally, I mentioned I was trying to get a measure of when we had an extra high-tier aircraft, the enemy had an extra high-tier aircraft, or when it was the same. 13 of the battles, it was the same. The enemy had an extra high tier aircraft 8 times, and we had an extra high tier aircraft 4 times. So combined with this battle tier 8 number of 56%, it was quite a forbidding environment in which I flew this plane. So I think these figures are pretty strong, and that's reflected in the achievements. 37 of them in 25 battles is pretty good. 11 Winged Legends out of 25, 9 Heroes of the Sky, 7 Campbells, 5 Maguires, a Coche-Dub, a couple of Marseilles, and a couple of Aces. Pretty good. So this suggests to me that the SM-91 does have that disadvantage of having to fight Tier 8 aircraft, but it is a much stronger plane than the numbers on paper would suggest, and that has to be, I think, because of that extra equipment slot, which makes all the difference. The map for the forthcoming battle is Plateau, and it's the Blazing Sky variant with 5 sectors in the 5-spot pattern found on a die. All the sectors are garrisons, so the one in the centre is of prime importance because it allows easy access to the other sectors, otherwise known as map control. Battles on this map tend to be quite fluid. At times you'll hold the garrisons nearest your spawn, plus the central one. At others you'll hold one side or the other. The key thing is to try to own the central garrison for longer than the enemy, and then it's a question of holding more of the other garrisons than they do. If I show you the order of battle, you'll see that they have 3 tier 7 planes, whereas we've only got 2. However, we have another good premium and specialised heavy, albeit it's the tier 6 P-38L. We also have a stock tier 6 bomber, the Dornier 217M. I'm not a fan of the German bombers, certainly at these tiers. And a stock tier 7 Bf-109G, which has a nasty 30mm cannon. The enemy has a specialised Key 84, and that could be difficult to dislodge from the centre if the enemy owns it and it chooses to defend. There's a stock tier 7 Junkers 288A bomber, hardly any better than the Dornier 217M, I would suggest. A stock Yak 3RD, a highly manoeuvrable fighter but lacking powerful armament, and a specialised tier 6 XP-55. Tier 6 is where, in my opinion, the game starts to be dominated by heavy fighters instead of light fighters, so if both I and the P-38L play well, I think my team should have a slight advantage. Let's see what happened. As I enter this battle, I'd made up my mind to go straight for the central garrison to try and get that tactical advantage, map control, and deny the enemy the same. So we're going to climb. Now I would expect to find the enemy fighters here if they have the same idea as me. I'm climbing into the yellow altitudes here. I'll be looking for the heavy ADAs as my first targets. But then I'll be looking for enemy aircraft coming towards me from the opposite side of the sector. So there's the first ADA heavy. Have a shot at that, have a shot at this light fighter, and now we can see the enemy approaching. Shoot at the Typhoon. It evades, unsurprisingly. I decide to go for the bomber, even though there's a fighter behind me. And that's the bomber down, and that secures the sector. Now I'm getting hit, and here you can see an illustration of just how awkward that window for the rear gun is. It's very difficult to get it on an aircraft consistently. So the Key 84 had been chasing me, but got distracted by something else, so now I've turned at a safe distance. I'm sizing up what I can do. I see the XP-55, so we'll try and shoot that. And that goes. Then a Typhoon is in a low energy configuration, or a low energy state if you prefer, so I shoot that. Next up is a bot to Svilling. Shoots at me but misses. Pleased about that because those guns can wreck you. And as it's a bot, I turn on it and I finish it off. And then below me I can see the Junkers 288A. It's a human player, human bomber. It may not be the most powerful bomber, but it's worth taking out. It's actually almost destroyed, but I get to finish it off anyway. Now the other bomber, the A-26, is within my compass, but then I spot a fighter coming towards me. It's the Ki-84. It does a bit of damage to me, quite a lot of damage actually, but I still managed to kill it, but unfortunately that puts me in a position where the XP-55 can kill me. But a good little sortie there. As I come back into the game, the enemy has now captured the central garrison, and in fact we're 4-1 down. So I need to get my skates on. We need to capture some sectors and try and stop this situation from getting worse than it already is. So I head towards one of our local garrisons, the one on the left. I'm only seeing bots at the moment. Head towards the heavy. And my team manages to capture that garrison. So it's time to go off to one of the enemy's local garrisons, which is looking as if it's ready to fall. Then I spot a mosquito down below me. Too tempting a target to ignore. So I pursue it. Turns conveniently. Now I wreck it with the guns. Now it looks like we're going to have Q syndrome here. It looks like we may capture that sector before I get to it. Think about going for the heavy. I can see it's being addressed already, so I'd decide to go for the P-40 defence aircraft. I kill it, and we check the sector. Now, temporarily, that brings us to 3-2, but you can see that one of the garrisons, if you look at the top, we're about to lose it. So I waste no time going for the centre. And then I realise there's a multi-role not paying any attention to me above me, so I decide to shoot that. Remove it as a threat. We've now lost that garrison, so we're down, losing 2-3 again. Looking at the heavy. Begin to shoot that. Land the shots nicely. You can see how good these guns can be. That's without Marksman 1 and Marksman 2, remember. P-40 below me, going quite slowly. Certainly damaged that. Killed it myself. And that flips the sector, and we're at 3-2. I decide to shoot the Mosquito because it's targeting one of my aircraft. I'm aware of the fighter behind me. Again, try and get that rear gunner, but the window just doesn't allow it. So I turned around because I noticed the XP-55 was being shot at by something else and was distracted. Then I noticed the Ki-84, which unwisely goes head on at me for a second time, and this time doesn't do as much damage, and I get rid of it quite quickly. During that time, the XP-55 was removed from the game. See the ground attacker coming into the centre, meat and drink for this aircraft, so decide to go after that, and something destroys it. So now I want to push on this sector, so we've got a buffer and we can start retrieving some of the deficit we've got in terms of influence points. Start shooting at one P-38 air defence aircraft, decide to have a shoot at the other because it might be easier, decide it isn't, so I go back to the original one. Finish that one off, and that flips the sector, and now we're 4-1 up, and we're about 80 influence points behind. But I decided not to go for the enemy sector, otherwise if we get superiority then this game will finish much more quickly than I want it to. This is a tier 7 battle, and I want to try and farm as much as I can, because the next 5 games might be tier 8 games. Look at the civilian, look at the Ki-84, of course the Ki-84 is a human player. It's not paying me any attention, so I'm going to try and get rid of it. Managed to hit it, take about half of its health. It doesn't respond, doesn't come after me, so I put a little bit more difference between us. Distance. And this time I come back and finish it off. And that leaves me with only the Zwilling nearby, so I decide to go for that. Now, the Zwilling is a fairly fragile aircraft, but it didn't take me long to whittle down what was, I think, 400 hit points. These are good guns. We're beginning to dominate this battle, so now I'm looking around for action that I can take. You notice I haven't used the bombs here, which is why, given my playing style, I might very well take the bombs off and get a little bit more speed out of it. That wasn't a comment on what I feel about the bombs. I just accidentally fat-fingered the space bar and dropped a bomb. You can see the Junkers 288. Let's remove that. And it goes. Ground attackers below me with nothing else threatening me, so I can go down safely and destroy them, or help destroy them. You can see the clustering of the shots there, even though I haven't got those marksman skills. Finish off this ground attacker. Pinch the other one. Oh, in fact, actually, it's at full health, so I'm not pinching it. The Hero of the Sky badge goes through. Swing round. And that gets destroyed by a bot, so now I can shoot at this P-47B. Finish that off, even though the P-38 was trying to kill it as well. That's the 19th kill. The enemy does manage to take the centre, but now we're well ahead. I look at the Key 84. I'm also looking at what my P-38 is doing. Probably we shouldn't be shooting at the same target. But, frankly, there's more or less no other targets available. I'm a little bit unlucky. I don't get to finish it off. The P-38 manages to get that one. Try and get on the tail of something else. The fighter doesn't pay me any attention, so now I can turn for it. And then I notice there's a fighter coming towards me. Try and get on that. Certainly threaten it enough to make it miss me. Try and use that rear gun again. Try and fail again. And the game finishes with me on 19 kills. Just one short of an ace. A little bit unlucky not to get that ace. But as you can see, handsome return for a well-fought battle. That brings me to the end of this review of the SM-91. When I saw the numbers for the plane, I wasn't impressed. But when I saw it had 5 equipment slots as opposed to the usual 4 for a Tier 7 Heavy, I realised the flexibility that conferred would do a lot to help the plane overcome those ordinary numbers. I'm happy with my arrangements for the offensive weaponry, but I'm looking forward to trying different combinations of equipment on the airframe and engine. The plane is going to struggle in some Tier 8 battles, given the likely presence of powerful Tier 8 premium planes, and unfortunately you're likely to find you're in those more often than you are in Tier 7 battles. However, it's capable of giving a good account of itself when it's low tier if you're careful where you put it on the map. On the other hand, in some Tier 7 battles, if you know what you're doing, it's going to be formidable. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please watch out for my future content. Until then, this is the Noble Q, signing off.